Welcome to the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School's PON Live session. Today's virtual faculty session is with Professor Francesca Gino, who will discuss staying adaptive through crisis. My name's Susan Hackley. I'm the Managing Director of the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. PON is a consortium program of Harvard, MIT, and Tufts University. Today's session will be recorded and posted on our website within a few days. The slides that will be shown today will be shared with you via email on a PDF. First, a few ground rules. Please use mute during the session. That reduces the background noise. If you have a question, please use the raise your hand function and the speaker may call on you, or use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. If your internet speed is slow, you may need to turn off your camera to improve quality. Now I'd like to briefly introduce today's presenter. Francesca Gino is a Tandon Family Professor of Business Administration, Negotiation, Organizations, and Markets Unit at Harvard Business School. She is an award-winning researcher who focuses on why people make the decisions they do at work and how leaders and employees can have more productive, creative, and fulfilling lives. Francesca Gino is the author of Rebel Talent, Why It Pays to Break the Rules in Work and Life. She has been honored as one of the world's 50 most influential management thinkers and has won numerous awards for her teaching. Welcome to PON Live, Professor Gino.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks for all of you for taking the time to listen in. I want to make the session as interactive as possible. So as you heard from Susan, if you have questions or if you want to chat in, comments, please do so throughout the hour that we have together. I want to talk about how to stay adaptive through crisis in the context of some of the ideas of the book that Susan mentioned, which is titled Rebel Talent. Since, as it turns out, some of those ideas are actually quite relevant for the moment that we are living through now. And what I want to do with you is share ideas, share some stories from all sorts of context. And the hope is that you're going to walk away with a few insights, or maybe many insights on how is it that you can approach life and work differently in the current crisis so that you gain even more joy out of your day-to-day experience. And I want to start with a story that comes from Italy. And in fact, it's a reminder, if you just want to chat in where you're calling in from so that we see how wide the range of locations are. And it might also be fun to focus on one of the opportunities that this crisis is giving us of going global with participations. But I want to start with a story that comes from Italy. And it comes in particular from a 3 Michelin star restaurant that back in 2016 became the best restaurant in the world. And they were back at the top of the list in 2018. Moment of Italian pride, I should say, since it was the first time that an Italian restaurant reached the top of the list. And this is really a story of a family of 4 visiting this restaurant called Osteria Francescana on a Friday night. So imagine the parents, mom and dad, and then 2 boys. One is 8-year-old and the other one is 13 years old. And as is tradition, at 8 p.m. on a Friday night, the restaurant doors open up, the family is welcomed into the restaurant, and everybody is taken by Giuseppe Palmieri to their table. They sit down, they're given a few minutes, and then Giuseppe Palmieri shows up to take the order. And the father was really eager to eat at this restaurant, goes with the same order for each of the 4 of them. And it's a 13-course tasting menu. It's called Sensation. And it might be from the way you're located, dinner time for some of you are coming up to dinner time. I want to tell you a little bit about the type of dishes that are on this menu. They're quite creative. They are wonderfully placed. They're also delicious, but they're a bit misleading. So this one, for instance, is eel. This one might look like a funny ice cream. In reality, It's not ice cream, it's foie gras. So not really the type of dishes that growing boys would hunger for. Now, this father was so excited to eat at this restaurant. It took him months to book a table, that he not only made the reservations for Friday night, he also made the reservations for Saturday night. So it's now 24 hours later. Again, 8 p.m., the door of the restaurant opened. The family is welcome into the restaurant, brought to their table. And this time the father, when asked for the order, goes for a 10-course tasting menu. It's called Tradition in Evolution. He has some of the most popular dishes at the restaurant. And one of them is served as a soup. But the name for it on the menu is Snails under the earth. And the dish gets that name because there are actually snails at the bottom of the plate. And they're hidden under a foam of raw garlic and potato, and the earth parts of the dish stands for black truffle nuts and coffee. Now, when Palmieri took the order, he noticed almost a face of desperation in the two boys, as if they were not really as eager as their father to have another gourmet meal. And the boys were keeping quiet, they were being quite polite, but Palmieri turned to the 8-year-old at the table and asked, "What would you like to have?" There was no hesitation. "Pizza!" That's what the 8-year-old told him. Now, Osteria Francescana is no pizzeria. In fact, you can't find pizza on their menu. It's a rather sophisticated restaurant. It's a 3-Michelin star restaurant. There is a lot of attention to details in preparing the dishes, in assembling them, in setting the tables. And in fact, there are all sorts of interesting rules that needs to be followed to create this remarkable experience for your consumers, where they're spending quite a bit of money to have a remarkable moment and a remarkable meal. And I can tell you that across all sorts of restaurants that I visited throughout the years, I should say for research purposes, these rules are usually followed quite precisely because you're trying to create this remarkable experience. But when Palmieri heard the pizza, he excused himself, he ran to the phone, he called up the best pizzeria in town and ordered the pizza. And sure enough, about 15 minutes later, a taxi showed up at the door of the restaurant and pizza was served to the two boys. Now, I'm sharing this story with you because it is a perfect example of what I mean by rebel talent. Palmieri in that moment was dealing with a mini crisis, definitely not the type of crisis that we're living through now, but with a mini crisis, with the situations that he had not encountered before. And yet, rather than just going and sticking to the rules, he thought creatively and differently about the situation. And he came up with a solution that, in his own words, only take one changing course and one pizza that really created a memorable experience, not only for the father and the mother at the table, but also for the two boys. Now, what I also love about this example is that usually when we think about these rebels, the people who come to any situation thinking differently, embracing uncertainty, embracing the crisis, we don't think of people like Palmieri. In fact, this is a question that I ask to all sorts of people, all sorts of leaders in organization, all sorts of employees. And generally the image that comes to mind when you ask who are the rebels in your business or in your life is more an image like this one. We think about that very annoying colleague or that annoying friend that gets in our way every time we are trying to accomplish something. We think about the people who seems to be contrarian just for the sake of being contrarians. We think of the people who we call troublemakers, or sometimes we call them jerks, or we call them show-offs. And what I wanted to suggest instead with this work on rebels is that, yes, those people might exist out there, but there are also people like Palmieri who are pushing boundaries, moving away from rules or thinking differently about them in a way that is very constructive. And those are the people who I think are quite inspiring and people we can learn from, because fundamentally they adapt to any situation. They think creatively about the situation that they're facing in a way that allows them to make the best of those situations rather than feeling paralyzed. And when I think a lot about the conversations that I've had now for the many past few weeks, lots of friends, lots of colleagues experience a lot of stress in this crisis that seems to not giving us a lot of control over what is happening. And so what I want to do in the time that we have together is share stories about what makes these rebels effective. Why is it that they're able to turn things around, to embrace crisis in a way that allows them to feel better and feel more joy about life and about work as well. And I'd like you to think about these ideas and these stories with two mindsets, if you will. One is what it is that you can take away for yourself, such that you get to approach your life and your work differently, hopefully applying some of these insights. And the other idea is how can you make others better, despite the fact that, again, we're in a difficult situation. And when I think about that question, I'm reminded of an interesting quote that comes from an Italian sculptor and artist, Michelangelo Buonarroti. Here's what he wrote about the sculpting process. He said, "Sculpting is a process whereby the artist releases an ideal figure from the block of stone in which he slumbers." When I first read this quote, I paused, because he raised a really interesting question. He raised the question of what if we were all to assume that there is great talent all around us, in our professional networks, at work, in our personal lives, with the people we interact with, and that our job as leaders, but also as colleagues, also as parents, as partners, as friends, is to create the conditions where others bring out their talent, to do more of that sculpting. And so that is the second mindset that I'd like you to keep in mind as we grow through this story and these insights. Not only what insights we can apply ourselves to our work and life, but more broadly, how we can also help others who are struggling through this crisis to apply these ideas by allowing for better conditions because we think more carefully about the sculpting. So let me start with a story that comes from the domain of sport. Some of you might be familiar with this coach. Lots of you are calling from all sorts of parts of the world. This is an example from the United States where I promise we'll go abroad outside of the United States. But this is a coach, his name is Maurice, who had quite an interesting career in basketball. And what I want to tell you about him is a particular evening in his life. Is April 23 in 2003. And he finds himself in a big arena with thousands of fans and millions of viewers ready to watch the game from home. And for a moment, I'll ask you to imagine being in his shoes. So you're there, 20,000 fans. You're probably quite excited about the game that is about to start. It's game 3 of the first round of the 2003 NBA championships. Imagine how you would feel. Probably a little nervous because it's a big name, clearly quite focused on the game. And right before the game started, a girl who's about 14 years old in age walked into the middle of the arena, ready to sing the national anthem. Now I have a clip of that moment that I'd like to share with you. And the ask is, watch what this coach does in that moment. And then I'll ask for your reactions.
And now to honor America and salute the men and women serving our country with our national anthem, please welcome, as voted by you, the fans, our winner of the Toyota Get the Feeling of a Star promotion, Natalie Gilbert.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the starlight stars?
Starlight,
stars like last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. Oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, and the sea in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Now, let me ask you a question. Does this guy have a good voice? Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking, absolutely not. And yet, it took him no time to go out there to show millions of viewers, thousands of fans, that singing is not one of his strengths. And in doing so, he made himself vulnerable, showing everyone the same thing. And what I found most interesting is that usually that's not the choice that we make in our life. It's not the choice that we make at work. And if we think about positional leadership, that's clearly not the choice that we make in front of our team members. And it's interesting because, like me, you might have felt moved watching this clip. In fact, if you didn't, I think you should check your pulse to make sure that there is a heart in there. We might think that making ourselves vulnerable backfires, but it's just the opposite. Others get to see our human side and connect with us much more easily. I think this is really important. It's a feature that I see in effective rebels all the time, this willingness of making themselves vulnerable. But it's particularly important at a time of crisis. Not showing to others that we're completely perfect, that we figure it all out. I've started conversations with work colleagues, oftentimes talking about something that happened in my life or on a call that I was, and my child popped up in a way that was unexpected. And it is okay. Making ourselves vulnerable actually allow us to gain respect and influence from others. Now, there was a question that we didn't address from Sandra, but this is a good moment to stop and see. Sandra, if you want to ask your question now, we can definitely see what was on your mind. Sandra, go ahead.
I think it was a mistake. I was trying to register.
Wonderful. We're talking about vulnerability, and so it is absolutely great that you made that comment. Sandra Elvin, do you have a question?
No, I like where you're going. I like it.
Perfect. Thank you for the feedback. Now, it is true, as some of you are noticing, that it wasn't focusing on vulnerability, it was focusing on helping the girl. And in fact, that's often what we end up doing by making ourselves vulnerable. The focus is not on ourselves, but is allowing others to enter the conversations quite differently. Now, let me tell you about another important ingredient of these rebels that, again, I think has something quite important to tell us, especially at a moment of crisis. And speaking of crisis, I'm going to share with you an image that comes from 2009. This is a picture that you might have seen in the press, in the media. It's the picture of a flight that left LaGuardia back on a cold evening in 2009. And the captain aboard of this plane was Captain Sally Sullenberger. And the story became famous because, as shown here, Captain Sally Sullenberger decided to ditch the plane with 155 passengers in the Hudson River, not too far away from LaGuardia Airport in New York, and everybody was safe. Now, I have learned about this flight, not because of the movie that was made on this accident, not because of the books that Captain Sally Sullenberger ended up writing about the experience, but because as a person who's interested in the psychology of decision making, I found myself sorting through some interesting data, which is data on plane accidents. So it's free, it's available, and you get to read the conversation as it was unfolding. And what was striking when I read the data about this particular accident is the type of choices that Captain Sally Sullenberger was making. At a time where we really had no time whatsoever, he only had 208 seconds to make a decision. That's the time that he had when he discovered that there was no thrust in the engine and the time he ditched the plane in the Hudson River. Within that time, what we know from psychology is that our mind often goes into tunnel vision. We're trying to focus on the most obvious answer, which in his case would have been land at the closest airport. And instead, as it was clear from the conversation, he kept considering alternatives. He was eliminating them rather quickly, but he kept broadening his view and keeping perspective. And it was so striking that I ended up reaching out to him with an email out of the blue, wanting to learn more about the experience. And Captain Sally Sullenberger was really kind and generous with his time. And what I discovered when I talked to him is that by the time the accident happened, he had a ton of experience under his belt. He had served in the military, so he had experience flying all sorts of planes. He had over 30,000 hours of flying experience. He has also served as a volunteer studying previous plane accidents. So he had a lot of information and data about what it is that can go wrong on planes. And yet, despite all of that, every time he walked into the cockpit, he kept asking himself a simple question, which was, what do I stand to learn today? How is it that today could be different? And that is a really refreshing question that he kept asking that allowed him to always broaden our perspective. Now, part of the reason why I love to use rebels as a label to describe these people is that being a rebel means fighting against our human nature. Our human nature in any given situation is to look at problems, look at situations from one angle, our own perspective. And what rebels tend to do instead is broaden their perspective, consider all sorts of angles in any given situation. And especially at a time of crisis, that is really important because broadening our perspective, as I found in some of the research that I conducted recently on people who are like us living through this crisis, is allowing us to be more satisfied with the life that we have, despite the fact that many of us are in lockdown, is allowing us to find more joy in the small things, is allowing us to feel more gratitude for the many things in our life that are actually going well. So hopefully rebels like Sally can inspire us to be reminded of the importance of having this very broad perspective. Now, there are other characteristics that I want to tell you about. And for the next one, if you don't mind, I'm going to share a personal story. This is something that happened at our house a few years back at Christmas time. And I had what I thought was the perfect gift for my husband. My husband is a geek, so if you want to make him happy, just buy him whatever piece of technology that just was launched on the market. Usually gets you a really big smile. And on Christmas Day, he wakes up, goes downstairs, finds the big tree, and under the tree there was this very large box that I prepared for him with his gift. And he takes the top off, he has a big smile on his face, and then he starts going inside the box. And you would see a lot of him trying to get the paper out, looking for his present. And at the very bottom of the box, he found a card that let him know that I signed us up for a 10-week course, 2 hours a week in improv comedy. Now, I have to confess, the smile was lost right there, since my husband was really hoping for a piece of technology. And I started questioning my own judgment for presents. But then I thought, you know what? I think that as soon as we start going to class, he's going to love this. And so we went to the first class, 2 full hours of improv comedy. And I still remember him running towards me with an intense face. And he said, "I hate this." Now, fortunately, we had 9 more weeks to go, and it was interesting to see how throughout the 9 weeks, his attitude started changing. And he really started to appreciate this weekly date with the unexpected. And I'm sharing this story because what improv did for us was every week putting out ourselves in situations that brought about a lot of discomfort. We were doing exercises, scenes with people we often didn't know that really stretched our level of confidence. They were novel, they were new, things that we had not done before. And again, when I think about our human nature, that's not the path that we choose for ourselves. We rather go for what's familiar and stable, something that we know how to do well. And when I think about this crisis, what that is doing for a lot of us is creating a sense of feeling paralyzed because we are now working from home. We have all sorts of demands on our time. Often we are homeschooling in addition to working. And it's very, very, very tough for a lot of people to deal with this sense of discomfort. But if we're able to embrace it, we're going to be able to benefit from the fact that we're going to be stretched in all sorts of ways. And I can tell you that there is a lot of great research that shows that embracing the challenge, embracing the new, turn out to be beneficial, even if, as in this case, is not something that we would have chosen for ourselves. And even in regular time, there are ways of creating more challenging experiences such that we get to approach work or life in a little bit of a different way. In fact, this is a question that I was very intrigued by, and I ended up studying all sorts of businesses that, despite the focus that they might have on efficiency, think about injecting novelty. I'm going to give you an example of a business in the middle of Tennessee and West Virginia. So this is a fast food chain. They're called Pulse Sudden Service. And they get their name because they truly care about efficiency and fast service. In fact, just to give you a sense of how they work, if you look at any measure of performance, revenue per square, you name it, they beat the competition by far. And we're talking about big brands like McDonald's, Burger King's. As a way of thinking about some of their business. If at a place like McDonald's, you should expect that it takes a minute or 2 to fulfill an order. At Pulse, it takes about 15 to 18 seconds. So they're really fast. If you think about errors, at a place like McDonald's, you should expect an order having an error every dozens of orders. At PAL, there is an error every 3,600 orders. So quite efficient, fast, few errors in their orders. And they prepare people differently for that. In fact, if you think about, for example, training, again, at McDonald's, every worker usually gets an hour and a half, 2 hours of training. At PALS, every worker receives 135 hours of training per station. Now, in a world like this one, you might imagine that if you're a worker in the center of the store, working in rush hours, work becomes monotonous. You're almost like a machine working really fast, which is, by the way, even outside of this context, the usual experience that we often have at work of getting into a routine, which is why it feels so strange now that it's difficult to recreate that routine. But the general managers at these stores have thought about that routine and they want to break people out of it. And so they find ways to create challenges for them or to create a little bit of unpredictability. So a couple of very simple examples. One is people have shifts that they follow in terms of how they move from station to station, but they actually learn about the order they're going to follow on every specific day when they show up for work. So it's not before, but when they're there. Again, it creates a little bit of unpredictability, uncertainty in a way that makes them more satisfied in the end with the work that they do and makes them perform better. Or the general managers of challenges. One of the ones that I love was a challenge that was given to a person working at the window taking orders in one of the stores in Kingsborough. And in order to make sense of it, you need to know that Pulse has a lot of repeat customers, so people who drive through there 5-6 times a week. And the challenge for the person was, if you get 100 orders in a row from repeat customers correctly, then there is going to be a special reward. And it was something that was doable because repeat customers get to make the same order every time they show up, but also quite challenging because you have to remember a lot of the orders from different customers. And it's something that it was a challenge, but when the person succeeded at this challenge, she felt a great sense of pride in the work that she was doing. And I'm telling you these stories because rebels have this capacity, even in normal times, of embracing novelty. And in a sense, with this crisis, the earth is shaking under our feet, and we have an opportunity to turn that discomfort into something that we can benefit of. It's important to still try to create a sense of routine for sure, but not being too afraid of the new challenges that are presented to us because of the crisis is actually equally important, so that we can benefit, we can feel differently about our days, we can feel differently about the work that we're still trying to accomplish. Now, there is another interesting element that I think it's important to put into the conversations. And in order to talk about this element, I want to turn back to another example that comes from sports. So I'm sitting here in Cambridge, where a lot of the people in the neighborhood are fans of the Red Sox, but we're not going to talk about the Red Sox. I want to tell you about a younger boy getting out into the baseball field. And I have a clip of this boy, and what I like to do is show you the clip and ask you to pay attention to what this little boy does quite easily. And we're gonna try to make sense of his behavior. So let's watch.
I'm the greatest hitter in the world! Strike one. I'm the greatest hitter in the world! Strike two. I'm the greatest hitter in the world! Strike three. Wow! I'm the greatest pitcher in the world! Yes!
Optimism. Pass it on. A message from the...
Now, what I love about this little boy is that it is something that doesn't come too naturally for most of us. Most of us dwell on our weaknesses. Sometimes we overinvest in our weaknesses. And this boy instead is able to shift his attention from a potential weakness to a potential strength. And when we do that, something really powerful happens. We feel authentic and we experience all sorts of benefits in the work that we do, but also in our own life. And one of the things that I'm hoping this crisis is creating for a lot of us is a moment of reflection, to try to think about aspects of our life or aspects of our work where we can really play to our strength and find more energy and satisfactions in what we do. And if you are listening in and you're in a position of leadership or you're working with a team, it's a great opportunity for you to have conversations with your team members about that also, or with people in your life, to see how is it that you can, again, create more opportunities for them to show up and play to their strengths. Now, I want to give you some ideas of why this matters. And I'm going to travel to India first to tell you about a study that I had the pleasure to do with an organization there called Wipro Technology. This is a study that my colleagues and I conducted a few years back, and it was a study that was the answer to a problem that Wipro brought to us. The idea was simple. Wipro was trying to hire a lot of people into their call centers, and what they were experiencing was quite a large problem. They were spending lots of energy, effort, money, training people, bringing them in. They had trainings that lasted 6 to 8 weeks. And then most people would leave once they were in the job 45 to 60 days after. So not the greatest investment from Wipro perspective. And so they came to us with the question of what it is that we could do to help them address this problem. And my colleagues and I decided to spend some time talking to the people who were in fact leaving the organization. And what we found out was a common narrative, people telling us that they felt as if they were just going to work to follow a script, that there was no flexibility, that they felt as if they were leaving their identity at the door. And so what we suggested is giving them the space at the time of the welcoming process for the new recruits to think about their strengths, to think about what's unique about them, in which ways they're different, in which way they experience authenticity in the work that they do, and how is it that they could bring that out more often in their work. And then 7 months later, when we went back to Wipro, we saw something really interesting. We saw a radical difference when it came to turnover rates. The people who had the chance to have that moment of reflection, who ended up feeling more authentic, were more likely to be with the organization. They also performed better in their job. And they also felt differently about the job, that they felt that their job was more of a source of joy rather than a source of frustration. And so again, it's tough during the usual way of working to find a moment to stop and reflect on what really allows us to bring our authenticity, our uniqueness into our life or work more often. And I'm hoping that this crisis is a good trigger for that moment of reflection. And in case you're wondering, this is not just about Wipro. We found that authenticity can be really powerful in many other contexts. One of them was pitching competitions in the United States. We looked at how entrepreneurs pitched their ideas to venture capitalists who then give them money for their ventures. And what we found was that when entrepreneurs were more authentic in their pitching, they were also 3 times more likely to get money for their ventures. We saw this in the context of interviews, when people were more genuine and authentic in job interviews, they were more likely to get the job. So authenticity really pays off. And authenticity can also be helpful when we are experiencing tough challenges at life or in our work. I want to go back for a moment to the story of the chef and owner that I mentioned earlier, Massimo Bottura. His story is a fascinating one. And it's fascinating because he went to a context, the traditional Italian dishes, and fundamentally decided to reinvent them, to do something different, to do something new, to do something innovative. And I don't know much you know about the Italians, but I can tell you that 2 things are definitely true. One, there are lots of rules when it comes to cooking. From the way you pair certain type of sauces to certain type of pasta, all sorts of sacred rules that need to be followed. I am married to an American, and we have been married for a very long time. And to this date, my husband doesn't understand why is it that every time he has pasta with a fish-based sauce, he can't put Parmesan cheese on top of it. It's just wrong. It's against the rules. You don't do it. And second, Italians, as many other cultures, cherish their old ways, especially when it comes to recipes that have been passed on for generations. And so here you have a chef who went exactly to that context and started asking a lot of questions. Why is it that we cook the dish this way? And maybe it made sense 20 years ago, but not today. Let's do something different. And maybe not surprising to you, when he opened the restaurant, tradition-bound Italians were very unhappy. In fact, there is a quote that he shared with me that really expresses the type of backlash that he received. And when I asked him, why is it that he persisted? The story that he shared was really a story of authenticity. He told me that he ended up spending a summer at Il Bulli, at that time, a very famous, successful restaurant. And what he learned from the chef and owner there was the importance of really using his dishes to play to his strength, to let others know about his ideas through his dishes. And so after that summer, he went back to Modena, sold everything that he had so that he could invest what he had left in the restaurant. He borrowed money from his wife's family and rethought some of the dishes to stay true to this idea. And sure enough, a few months later, the first Michelin star arrived, then the second one, then the third. And as I told you, in 2016, the restaurant became the best restaurant in the world. And I'm sharing this story because what it tells us is that authenticity can be really helpful when we are going through challenges in our life. And clearly, when we think about the crisis that we're living, it's a tough challenge for all of us to go through, and one that requires persistence. Now, this is not just a story about Boutour and his restaurant. It's something that is backed up by research. In fact, with my colleagues, we looked at different ways in which authenticity can help us persist. And I will share just a study, a quick study that we conducted outside of an organizational context. We decided to invite Red Sox fans to Harvard Business School, to our campus. And they were there with us for the afternoon, going through all sorts of challenges and type of tasks where we knew they would fail. And we were interested in seeing how long they would persist, depending on what they were wearing. So some of them at the beginning of the afternoon that we had together were given wristband of their favorite team, the Red Sox. And some of them instead received the wristband from the New York Yankees. And for those of you who are living abroad, as I saw from your chats at the beginning of this webinar, you might not know that there is great rivalry between the two teams. And in fact, the people who were wearing the wristband of the New York Yankees felt very inauthentic. And those wearing the wristband of the Red Sox felt very authentic. And what we found is that across all sorts of tasks that we put in front of these Red Sox fans, those wearing the Red Sox and wristband and feeling authentic, they fared better. In fact, we even had a physical challenge where we asked people to put their dominant hand in a bucket of ice and stay there as long as they could. And even in that task, we see a difference in the number of seconds that people who felt authentic were able to persist. And I'm sharing this story because they point to something really important that comes naturally to rebels, and this willingness to embrace their talent for authenticity. And there is no better time than a crisis as a time to reflect on really where our strengths are and take that moment for reflection such that we approach work and life with more authenticity rather than doing what our human nature often leads us to do, which is conforming to the views and opinions and behavior of others. Now, there is a final element that I like to touch on, and then we'll hopefully have some time to address some of the questions that might be on your mind that you want to explore a little further. And I want to share another personal story, if you don't mind. This is something that happened in my house a few years back. I have 4 little children, and my oldest at the time was 4.5 and was up for breakfast. His name is Alex. So imagine Alex is sitting at the counter. He has a bowl of milk and cereals in front of him. And Alex was looking really pensive. So my husband went to him and said, "Hey, Alex, what are you thinking about?" And Alex said, "Daddy, remember those little bottles with coloring that we used for Easter to color our eggs?" My husband knew exactly what Alex was talking about, so he went to the cabinet, he brought the little bottles back to him and then said, "Alex, what are you going to do with them?" And Alex smiled, like that perfect smile of a little boy who knows exactly what to do next. And he said, "I'm going to color my milk." And you should have seen the face of my husband. He was totally puzzled by the answer. And he looked back at Alex and said, Alex, we don't do that. And Alex said, why not? And then my husband turned to me, since I was watching the entire scene, and said, Mommy, we don't do that in this house, right? And as my husband and I were having this very heated conversation about whether it's right or wrong to have color in your milk, all of a sudden Alex had opened up the bottle of red coloring and put red coloring in his milk, and his cereals were swimming happily in pink milk. And I'm sharing this story with you because it's a beautiful reminder of what we do very naturally when we're little kids. We explore, we push boundaries, we ask a lot of questions. We have that great sense of awe and wonder that we use to look at the world, to any situations. We ask questions constantly. In fact, just the other day, my 3-year-old was asking me, why is it that we pay for things? Or why is it that we need to wear clothes when we go outside? All sorts of questions that come to mind as they approach the world. Unfortunately, that level of curiosity goes away as we grow older. In fact, if you look at the data, what the data shows is that curiosity peaks at the age of 4 and 5, and then it declines steadily from there. By the way, I was very upset when I saw this data because I'm clearly not 4 or 5, I'm much older than that. And I thought, you know what, there might be something missing in the story. And I said, maybe when we get to being adults and choose our own life and choose our own work, that's when curiosity pops back up. And I can tell you, I was wrong. So I collected data from all sorts of people starting jobs across the globe, across all sorts of industries and roles. And what you see is that curiosity at the beginning of a new job, for instance, or a new role tends to be pretty high. But when you go back to the same people, 9, 10 months later, curiosity had dropped by at least 20% across the board. And unfortunately, when we stop asking questions, when we stop being curious, we suffer all sorts of costs. We make poor decisions. We're not as creative. We're not as satisfied with our relationship, with our life. And so it's really important to think about how to retain that curiosity and how to help others do the same. I have a couple of examples that I'd like to share with you. One comes from a firm called Intuit. What Intuit does every year, like many other organizations, is to have innovation awards. And these awards goes to people whose explorations led to new products. But they also have failure awards. And the failure awards goes to people whose explorations did not lead to a new product, but led to important lessons for the group or the organization. And what I love the most about these failure awards is that they come with a failure party. So it's not just a nod to the fact that it's okay to be disciplined and keep experimenting, but they celebrate it when it leads to important learning. Now, I shared some stories from Osteria Francescana and from Massimo Bottura. I wanna tell you a final story about them that has to do with curiosity. It was a very busy night at Osteria Francescana, and one of the sous chefs, who's known in the restaurant as Taka, was working on the last dessert of the night, and it was a lemon tart. Taka is known for being obsessed with attentions to details. He's incredibly precise in his work and quite good at it. And as he was carefully arranging all the different pieces on the plate, all of a sudden the tart dropped to the floor. And now you had a smashed tart. And Taka was starting to panic, not knowing what to do. And at that point, Chef Massimo Bottura walked into the kitchen and saw the mistake. It's interesting to ask what it is that you would have done in that moment. Many leaders I've met would have started yelling at the mistake, but Bottura didn't. And not only that, he looked at the plate on the floor and then back up at Taka and said, Taka, I think we have a new idea for a new dessert. And sure enough, they came up with a new dessert. It's a deconstructed lemon tart and is now the most popular dessert at the restaurant. I took a picture while I was there. The name for it on the menu is Oops, I Dropped the Lemon Tart. And it's just a beautiful reminder of a person who takes curiosity seriously. Every time there is even an accident or a mistake, is able to see the source of opportunity. And in a context that is requiring us to think differently about our work, about our life, where we have all sorts of constraints, staying curious is crucially important. Now, I have a few final thoughts, but I see some questions, and so I want to make sure that we address them. Andreas, let's go to you. And make sure that you unmute yourself. Andreas, I think you're still muted. It's the beauty of this technology, not knowing. Okay, as we're waiting for Andreas, there are a couple of more thoughts that I like to cover. And in the meanwhile, if there are other questions and hands, please feel free to raise them. When I think about what rebels have to teach us, I really come back to these ingredients as these talents that they have. This talent for novelty, curiosity, perspective, diversity, and authenticity. And there is no better moment than one of crisis to really think about small ways in which we can embrace them. As I said, they don't come naturally to us because our human nature is pushing us to do just the opposite on all of them. We take things for granted rather than asking questions. We use one view rather than broadening our perspective. And even when it comes to diversity, it's a beautiful example of how we can leverage differences. When I was working on this project on the rebels, I ended up with a really interesting organizations, I think, that leverage differences in a unique way. And it's pirate ships in the 16th century. Here's why they're interesting. At the time when it was about 200 years before slavery ended in the United States, they were the most diverse organization on the planet. They were getting people on the ship because of their commitment and skills and ideas rather than gender or even race. And so they're a wonderful example of how to leverage differences. They're also interesting because they had this unique perspective on how to think about the captain. The captain was chosen by the crew, and the crew at any given moment could remove the captain quite easily if they were not happy with how he or she was leading the ship. And you raised a really interesting questions to me that I ask constantly in my daily life, even now in lockdown, as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, as a colleague on Zoom calls. Am I the type of captain that my crew would choose as his leader today? And it's a very humbling questions to keep on asking. But let's see if I can turn it to you and see what kind of questions are on your mind. Jose, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I was wondering if the rebel will be an ingredient for a leader, or we're talking just vice versa. Is a rebel with manners the best leader we can find?
So yes, I have met lots of leaders who have these talents. And in fact, when I think about what I'm hoping will emerge from this crisis from a business perspective is rebel leaders leading the way. But any of us in all sphere of life and also in all parts, no matter where we sit in the organization, have the opportunity to really embrace these talents more often. And that's the hope that I had when I was working on this project, and the hope that I have in talking about these ideas to all of you. Thanks, Jose, for your questions. I'm also chatting something that you can look up as a way to start your rebel journey or see where you are on your rebel journey. There is a website that I created when this book came out, and he has a test called Rebel Tests. And so if you're curious to see what kind of rebels you are, you can visit the website and take the test. It's free, and it gives you a chance to reflect on your own style. Gianluca, let's go to you.
Okay. Hi. My question is, I see the why to rebel. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. But the problem I faced in life is, when is it the appropriate time to rebel? When it is the appropriate time to break the rule? Sometimes in my own experience, I've broken a rule when it was the wrong timing, and the consequences were dire.
Yeah.
So how do you match timing with the moment?
Very good question. I think what allows you to think about timing, it's the style, and perspective is a really important element of constructive rebelliousness. In fact, I follow some rebels who were lacking on perspective. That's usually what got in their way, because at that point often rebelliousness come across as arrogance. And so I would be thinking about ways in which you can be the one suggesting new ideas or talking about a different way forward, but in a way that starts from a point of acceptance. One of the beautiful things that I learned from taking improv comedy classes is how they think about bringing your ideas forward. And there is a core principle of improv that is called yes and. And the idea is to come in and start from a point of acceptance. I accept what's there, which might be the current ways of working or the ideas that others have suggested, and then I build constructively on that. And perspective really allows you to do that effectively. So I think of it in terms of style rather more than timing. However, the best rebellious organizations and leaders are those who make it clear to everyone where the boundaries are, such that people are able to shift their attention to pushing boundaries versus not in very effective way. I'll also say, addressing many of the questions that are popping up in chats, and thank you for them, is that you might be thinking, maybe I can do that now, but then when I go back to work, I am part of an organization that is bureaucratic, hierarchical, I can't do this. And I'm gonna question that. In fact, one of the places where I study leaders who are rebellious is an organization that is in fact bureaucratic, highly hierarchical, and one where the culture is do not rock the boat. It's a group in the Air Force, Squadron 99, a group of pilots primarily who fly spy planes. So these planes go 70,000 feet above the ground to take intelligent picture. And what was interesting is that a new leader came in a couple of years ago and said, we need to do things differently. If we want to be ready for combat, we need to approach work differently. And he really empowered with a lot of the concepts that we talked about his team. And if you look at the number of innovations that have come out of that group in the last 2 years, pretty remarkable and really impressive. What this leader did is adopting a different mindset from the one that I see a lot of leaders use in any organization, where you come in and you might say, I like a lot of things in my organization, but not this, not this, not this. And then many of the leaders I meet or managers, they throw their hands up in the air and say, but it's not for me to change. And I think we can all have the mindset of, we can be actors of change if we understand our span of control, as this leader in the Air Force actually did. Now, I know that we're up to time, and what I want to do, since I know that some of you had questions that we couldn't answer, is do reach out. This slide is there with all the possible ways you can contact me, because I want to start a conversation. I really want you to use, for you to make good use of these ideas. So do reach out. If you want to learn more, there is a book that is all about this topic, and it's a great time actually to go to your independent bookseller and help them survive the crisis. But I want to end with a very, very, very big thank you and turn it to Susan.
Thank you, Professor Francesca Gino, for an illuminating talk. And thank you to all of you, hundreds of wonderful people around the world who participated, shared your thoughts. On behalf of the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School, I invite you to go to our website. There's a lot of free information on negotiation there, and you can get information about upcoming events on the series live from PON. Thank you so much. Goodbye.